Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back, everybody, again to this yet another common flip just because we're all in the same place. All right, so now, anyway, also, because this is one of those kind of units that I don't really need to differentiate between because I teach it with a lot of depth, regardless of who I'm teaching it to, right? So everybody would be getting the same dose of it, regardless, so whatever. Now, anyway, where we left off in class, we were talking about the civil constitution of the clergy solving the immediate financial crisis of France, right? We were talking about the Women's March on Versailles and how that's going to be a monumental moment in Western civilization's history when a giant group of women were able to, extradite the king from his palace in Versailles and force him back into Paris, right? We talked about a lot of really, really huge, very, very seminal events that are going to be majorly important in this entire progress of this French Revolution, right? And where we left off in class, for most of you, we were talking about right around how the royal family was under house arrest, right? They were under house arrest here, okay? And if you don't remember how to spell that, this place is called the Tuileries, all right? And Tuileries is spelled Tuillieres, all right? So the Tuileries. This is where they were under house arrest, though, right? They were, stuck there, and they were in there for over a year, okay? So the big thing that occurs, though, is in 1791, the royal family is under house arrest, and the French want to keep their monarchy. Here's one of the craziest things about this entire event, is that the king was actually still heavily supported by most people of France, as in they still wanted a king. They still wanted Louis to be the king. They just wanted their issues fixed. They wanted bread, they wanted equality, they wanted liberty, they wanted fraternity, they wanted to get rid of the old regimes, they wanted to fix the financial situation. All of these things make sense. But Louis, on the other hand, is stuck in here with Marie Antoinette and their children, and he's going insane, right? He's going nuts because he's stir crazy. He's really, really mad about the civil constitution of the clergy because he is a devout Catholic and he thinks that that is going to be the most ridiculous thing ever. He hates that there are priests that are now loyal to France before they're loyal to the church. He was actually really hoping that the Pope would react and some of the other countries would react and come and save him. He's also really, really frustrated at the direction everything is going. He can't take any more of the reforms. And so one day, approached by Marie Antoinette's favorite, is what it's called, Favourite, his name is Axel von Fersen, he approaches him and says, "Sir, I have a plan. We're going to get you all out of here," right? And that's when the flight to Varennes occurs, right? And the flight to Varennes was in June of 1791, right? And in 1791, in June, they are going to try to escape, and they're going to try to successfully escape to Austria, right? Why did they want to go to Austria? They wanted to go to Austria because Marie Antoinette's brother, King Leopold, is the king of Austria, so if they can escape to Austrian lands, they will be able to escape to safety, right? And so the plan involved a lot of crazy details. Fake passports, fake disguises, multiple carriages, all this other stuff, right? Well, what ends up occurring, okay, the plan was that that they would disguise everybody in the family as different people, right? They would disguise everybody in the family as in Louis would be dressed as a valet or a bourgeois valet. Marie Antoinette would be dressed as a duchess or not duchess, but a governess, right? The children would be dressed up as like child servants and things like that. And then the governess of the Dauphin, which was one of their closest friends, would dress up as a baroness from Russia, right? So the plan was, though, to disguise themselves as middle-class members aiding the upper-class member in front of them that wasn't even an upper-class member, and they would use the few locked doors that weren't guarded at night, and they would sneak everybody out, right? It was also favored that they would use 2 carriages that would actually be individually drawn by about 4 horses instead of one larger one that would be much, much slower. Now, the big thing about it, though, is they have to get a long distance. They have to literally get from Paris to this place called Varennes, right? And Varennes is about 120, 150 miles outside of Paris, give or take, depending on the map you look at. Now, Varennes is very, very close to the Austrian Netherlands, aka now modern-day Belgium. And so the plan was to sneak everybody out one at a time, hop into these carriages, book it and try your best to get there in just a night, right? Try your best to leave around 10 p.m. when everybody starts going to sleep, and then you would gun it all the way over the border, and you would move as fast as you possibly could. Well, everything started going from bad to worse, one after the other, right? One moment after the other, everything just started going from bad to worse, right? So you can see the royal family here in their disguises, right? You can actually see everybody dressed up. And now, interestingly enough, some of the first things that happened is, one, a surprise inspection by the Marquis de Lafayette, right? So Louis was sitting at his study, and he was writing something, and the Marquis de Lafayette shows up the night they're trying to escape, right? And he's like, oh, hey, Louis, what's up? And that puts them behind schedule by about an hour or a half hour, but give or take an hour, right? So now they're already behind schedule by an hour. And then also, he continues writing. Marie Antoinette comes to get him. And you're like, are you coming or what? And he says, okay, fine, I'm coming, I'm done. He takes a letter, he seals it up, and then he leaves it on his pillow, right? So, and why would you do this, Louis? I have no idea. But then what he ends up doing is they all go out the doors one at a time. And the plan was to go down the stairs, take a left, take a right, whatever. But when you went out the back door, you needed to make sure you took a right so you actually got to the carriage that was right down the alleyway, right? Everyone took a right. Marie Antoinette took a left, and she ended up wandering around the alleyways of France for over a half an hour, right? So now they're behind schedule even more. And then also, once they got into the smaller carriage that would take them to their bigger carriages outside of the city, when Louis got there, he was like, no, we don't want to separate. We want our big carriage. We want the royal carriage to take us instead. So they now went from 2 fast carriages down to 1 slower one, right? And they're going, and then something breaks, and then we'll get to that later. But then out of nowhere, the Marquis de Lafayette shows back up again in the early morning hours, finds this letter on Louis's pillow, and it's written as basically saying that Louis is disgusted with the state of revolutionary France. He thinks it's gross, he hates it, and he basically is claiming that he's about to run away to Austria, raise an army, and come back. Now, he doesn't say, I'm going to run away to Austria, raise an army, and come back. He basically just pounds the entire revolutionary government, being like, these sadists, these bad people, blah, 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 blah. And so the Marquis de Lafayette has this letter. He's like, the only place they could be going is towards Varennes because there's that fort out there. Because there's a fort that they're all trying to get to that has a loyal military contingent inside of it. So the Marquis de Lafayette runs up, grabs as many soldiers as he can, and he starts heading out after them, right? And they're on horseback, not in a carriage. So they're actually going to be able to gain on them pretty quickly. And then on the way there, their carriage breaks. And actually you could see like one of the scenes right here. When their carriage breaks, instead of staying inside of the carriage and hiding, the royal family got out of the carriage and gave things to the people of, like, the poor people in the countryside. They gave them, like, silver-plated dishes and all these other fancy things. And the poor people were like, you're the king, aren't you? And he was like, yes, I am, and I know you love me, blah, 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 blah. And the people were like, is he supposed to be out here? And then, like, they got a little nervous. And then they get back in the carriage after it gets fixed, and then they start going on. And the sun's coming up, and they're very, very close to their destination. Very close, right? Just a few miles outside their destination. And everybody feels kind of home free. So everybody's starting to relax a little bit and sit up, and the sun's beginning to come up. What are the people that get up super early in the morning to go to work every single day? Not Mr. Terry. I am here right now at 7:01 recording this bad boy, as you can see. But the big thing, though, is the Louis XVI coin. Postman. So the big thing that ends up happening, though, is that who gets up really early to go to work? Postal workers, right? Postal workers get up very, very early to go to work in the morning. And one of them happens to ride up alongside of their carriage, right? And looks inside the carriage window just to give a wave and a good morning, right? Louis looks over, looks at him, waves back. And at that moment, the postal worker reaches down into his pocket, right? Reaches down into his pocket, starts shuffling some things around, and goes, wait a second. Looks at him, looks at the coin that he has in his pocket, because Louis the 16th's face is all over all of their money, recognizes him and says, oh, dang, and then just like flies off and then warns the military ahead in the next town. And they then proceed to capture the royal family after 1,000 things had gone wrong in this entire journey, right? And the worst part about the failure of the flight is that it destroyed any remaining popularity that the royals had, right? They wanted to escape from Austria, and it failed miserably. And now the people of France feel betrayed, right? The flight failed. They were captured. They were harassed the entire way back to Paris. And this failure literally is just going to be people like, well, those are just our prisoners now, and it's a matter of time until we don't need them anymore, right? But the flight to Varennes is very important. Now, during the flight to Varennes and during all this other crazy stuff going on, you're also going to see the rise of some groups, right? Some big groups that we got to talk about, okay? Now, this is one of those groups of people that, I'm definitely going to ask you to do a fill in the blank on, and we're talking about the rise of the sans-culottes, right? So now that Louis's popularity is destroyed because of this failed escape attempt, now that his popularity and his strength has been destroyed because the Women's March has forced him back to Paris, now that his faith is being destroyed because of the civil constitution of the clergy and all these other things going on, you have to understand that people are starting to get more and more frustrated, right? And at the very beginning of the revolution, the bourgeois were the ones leading it, right? They were the ones leading it, and they were using this mob of Paris to kind of just do their dirty work, do their bidding, to be their small little National Guard version of an army, right? And they were the ones that stormed the Bastille. They were the ones that stormed the Hotel des Invalides, right? So that's the Parisian mob, okay? But soon enough, the Parisian mob starts looking around. They're like, you know what? They need us to go out and destroy all this stuff. They need us to be the strong arm that they need. So you know what? We should organize, right? And that's exactly what they do. They organize themselves into a group. And many of them begin to call themselves the sans-culottes, right? We'll talk about what that means in a second. But after the failed flight, the mob of Paris demands more violence and more action. And they begin to be referred to by the bourgeois and many others as sans-culottes members, right? And that right there is a sans-culottes. Like this is a sans-culottes member. Notice the tricolor cockades on their hats. Notice the victory caps of the revolution. And what they are, they're organized mob members. They're They're radical revolutionary citizens, and they love violence and simple solutions. The sans-culottes wants bread. They don't want politics. The sans-culottes wants money in their pocket. They don't want complicated infrastructure. The sans-culottes wants work, not theories on how to get the economy running, right? The sans-culottes members will be the ones that show up to your house and stab you to death, right? Where a bourgeois member will put you on trial, okay? And what sans-culottes means? Sans-culottes in French means without pants, all right?
Tonight on Where Are My Pants?
Honey, where are my pants?
Now, as you can see, they do have pants on. They're not running around pantsless because that would be ridiculous, right? But the reason why they're called sans-culottes members is because they wore loose-fitting working man's trousers, right? Because that's these culottes. The culottes were these really, really, really high-fashion, fancy men's pants that were specifically fit and tailored to your legs, right? And that's what bourgeois members wore, and it's also what the royals wore, right? So basically they're saying, we are the without fancy pants people, all right? So, but yeah, the sans-culottes are going to be those radical revolutionaries that start burning stuff to the ground, right? So those are your violent Parisian mob members. Those are your extreme members, your sans-culottes members, right? But then you're also going to see the rise of a couple other groups, right? And you're going to see the rise of these bourgeois clubs. And I don't mean clubs like this, like when we were talking about the tennis. Club like that, all right? So I actually mean more of a club like this, okay? A members club, a club of men, right? And it's going to be mostly bourgeois members, right? Pretty much all bourgeois members. And they're going to begin to organize themselves based on their political opinions, right? And so the two biggest clubs that show up during this time period are the Jacobins and the Girondins, right? So the Jacobins are the ones who are radical. They're violent, and they use the sans-culottes as their little army, right? They're very, very intense. They want the royals to be put to death. They want extremely, chaotic noise so they can easily rule. The Girondins, on the other hand, they are moderate. They resisted violence, and they want they want to politically end the revolution, to bring about using documents and easeability and things like that, right? So you have to understand that these two clubs are wildly important. You need to star them, highlight them, do anything you can to make sure you know exactly who they are. So the Jacobins are very intense, very loquacious, very over-the-top loquacious. They talk a lot. They also are very, very violent, whereas the Girondins are much more moderate, and they want treaties and peace summits and things like that, right? So the big thing, though, is the Jacobin leaders, right? The Jacobin leaders are these guys, okay? So these three dudes are the big Jacobin leaders, and you need to write their names down, okay? The Jacobin leaders, and there's a reason why we're talking about the Jacobin leaders and not the Girondin leaders. A lot of it has to do with the fact that these three guys are going to end up killing a lot of people, right? So their names are Georges Danton, D-A-N-T-O-N, as you can kind of see right here, D-A-N-T-O-N. And then we have Jean-Paul Marat, right? It's Jean-Paul Marat, and Marat is spelled M-A-R-A-T. Some of y'all probably recognize his name. That's the newspaper writer that wrote the article that caused the Women's March on Versailles. This is the dude that actually lived in the sewers for a long time. That's him, all right? So Jean-Paul Marat, all right? So, and then you have one last one, and he is insanely important, and he's the most important out of all three of them. His name is Maximilien Robespierre, right? Spelled R-O-B-E-S-P-I-E-R-R-E. Maximilien Robespierre, right? So Robespierre, Danton, and Marat are all very important figures, and they lead this Jacobin club, right, against the Girondin club or the Girondin club, okay? Now, the big thing, though, you have to also understand is I have little nicknames for them, okay? So the Jacobins and the Girondins are two names that might be a little bit hard for you to remember, okay? Well, we have nicknames that we can refer to them as. So you can call the Jacobins Jerry's, and you can call the Girondins Gary's. Why? Because it's a lot like their similar personalities. This mouse is all the time trying to kill that cat, and it's really, really messed up. It's trying to blow him up and electrocute him, set him on fire, and like stab him to death and all these other things. Whereas Gary is just meow, and he's just really, really chill, okay? So instead, if you don't want to remember how to say Jacobins, you can call them the Jerrys, and then instead of Girondins, call them the Garys, because it'll be like their little personality traits, okay? So it's good little ways to remember them. Now, what's going to end up happening? God, why, France? Why are you doing this? All right, France is going to decide that it's time to go to war, right? Due to the causes of this war being the fact that the Austrians are obviously trying to help out the royals, right? Because they were the ones that were going to take them in if they actually successfully escaped. Due to the fact that also something that we don't discuss in this class because it's just not like as important, but in my AP class we talk about this thing called the Declaration of Pillnitz, when the Austrians and the other monarchs of Europe basically were like, hey, if you hurt Louis or kill him, we're going to invade your country directly, right? So revolutionary France, literally France, in the midst of a revolution decides, you know what? We're going to go to war, right? And they go to war, and this is going to be called the War of the First Coalition, okay? Because remember, everyone else in Europe is absolutism, right? Everyone in Europe is being led by an absolutist, so the other absolutists of Europe are getting very, very aggressive, and they want to crush revolutionary France as soon as they can, okay? Now, the other European powers begin to mobilize in fear to try and stop the French Revolution and try and replace the current government back with Louis and reinstall him as their king, right? So the new French government and the army are going to organize and they're going to declare war on Austria, right? And then other countries are going to come to the aid of Austria. And this is going to be known as the war, write this down, the War of the First Coalition, right? The War of the First Coalition is extremely important. Notice I said extremely important. The War of the First Coalition is extremely important. And this right here are all the other European monarchs mobilizing together, preparing to go to war with revolutionary France. And some of y'all are probably thinking to yourself, why would revolutionary France ever agree to do this? Why? Why would you ever agree to go to war when you don't even have like a sound government installed, okay? Well, the French are capitalizing on their passion, their zeal, their intensity, and they might have struggled a little bit early on, but they actually ended up coming out with massive victories, right? What did the French do? Like, what did the French Revolution do to all their enthusiasm? They're passionate. They want to fight. They want to go off for their government that they believe is now fighting for them instead of the government that used to be oppressing them, right? Yes, they struggled early on. Also, one of the biggest things that they got out of this whole thing, food, right? Because they were running out of it so badly that they needed to go have some victories against Austria and take some of their grain stores away, right? They're just so excited that they can't lose, right? Because they're just so pumped up about fighting for their new French government. And then also, very important that we jot this down, is that this guy is getting experience in the military during this war. I know Taylor Crescioni's freaking out right now because she's a big, big fan, and we'll get to him soon. Don't worry, Taylor. But that guy right there is going to be a captain within the French army during the War of the First Coalition. And it is called, his name is Napoleon Bonaparte, right? Write that down. He is getting experience, but it will be his time. He is very young at this point, and they're so amped up that the French Revolution is even causing them to have like a new national anthem written, and they adopt a brand new flag, the tricolor flag. They get rid of the old one. It's ridiculous, and we're gonna listen to La Marseillaise in class tomorrow because it'll get you so pumped up. Sorry, it just gets me amped up. I'll literally listen to it in the car every now and again. Now, meanwhile, though, back at home, because now we're at a war, right? So look at this flip objectively. What do we have happen, okay? We had the French royal family try to escape, and it failed miserably because of a lot of backfires, right? 2, we had the rise of some interesting groups of people, right? Sans-Culottes, Jacobins, Girondins. You need to know them, right? And then we also had French revolutionary, country is now at war, right? We got Napoleon Bonaparte getting experience. We got French passion and patriotism now flaring up. Now, while this is happening, do you think everybody's going to be just sitting there chilling and staring at Louis while he walks around his hallways in his palace? Of course not, okay? What's going to end up occurring right after some of the major victories during the First War of the First Coalition, there's going to be this massive attack on the Tuileries. And on August the 10th, 1792, the Sans-Culottes decide that they are fed up with the idea that that king that tried to escape, that we don't even like anymore, and he's disgusting, is sitting pretty in that palace and eating his face full of food, right? So what they do, they storm into the Tuileries, they capture him, and they arrest him, and they put him in jail, right? They actually literally take the French king, rip him out of his palace that he's under house arrest in, force him to wear a cap of the revolution, and they throw him in prison, right? They storm that palace. His power is gone. It does not exist anymore. And in August 10th of 1792, it's just a matter of time until Louis isn't around anymore. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.